Hello, welcome to the most recent edition of the Way to Wow shows. This is the Way to Wow Business Lessons from the Military. This is our first episode of this new show, something new I'm going to try, and my computer's going wacky. And it's an idea that I came up with after seeing what a friend of mine, Bill Gross, is doing. So he started a new show called Business Lessons from the Bible. And as you might imagine, we're talking about the most popular book in history. And there's lots of life lessons in the Bible, including lessons for people in business. And I thought it was such a terrific idea. And I couldn't steal the idea from him directly. You might say, well, wait a minute, how come a rabbi isn't doing that? Well, because, it's thou shalt not steal, right? But I thought, in the military, there's so many lessons about things like leadership, motivation, planning, execution, strategy, operations, tactics, all of these facets that can be applied to our business lives, whether we have our own business or whether we're working in another business. So this has kind of been my philosophy for a long time, and that is the American people, you, our fellow citizens, spend a tremendous amount of money training people in the military, helping or paying for the military to develop its doctrine that it uses to pursue its missions. And there should be some follow-on benefit for you. And so this is one way of my sort of giving back to you. People are very nice to say so often these days, thank you for your service to people in the military. And I return, thank you for your support. So this is one way for me to thank all of you for your support of the military. It makes a tremendous amount of difference. As I've remarked to many people, many of my military colleagues, we were very fortunate to serve during a time when the military was held in very high esteem, generally speaking, by our fellow Americans. And that has not always been the case. When I was a child, the military was frankly held in much lower esteem during the Vietnam era, et cetera. So I think it's incumbent upon us to not only express our gratitude to our fellow citizens, but maybe, if possible, make some kind of tangible offer to them, as so many of our fellow citizens do what they can to help us transition to civilian life. So make it a two-way street. So today I'm going to just talk about in general what we're going to be doing on this show. First of all, it'll be every week on Tuesday, today, right? 10:30 Pacific time. That's 1:30 Eastern time. That's correct, yeah. And then an hour in for 11. It'd be 11:30 Mountain Zone, 12:30 p.m. Central Zone, right? So across the United States anyway. And what Hawaii would be 2 hours earlier, so I guess Hawaii would be 8:30 a.m. and Alaska would be either 8:30 or 9:30 a.m. And then so on across the world if you're watching from outside the United States. And again, it'll be every Tuesday for 30 minutes. So whereas the Way to Wow show, People Making Money, is an hour long, I'm going to hold this to 30 minutes long. Many of the shows will be me talking about various military concepts that can be applied to our business and professional lives. Although I think I will experiment with some guest speakers as well. There's quite a number of leadership people from the military who work in the leadership development realm. I think you'd benefit from that. I was also thinking right before the show, perhaps I'll get someone on who was in recruiting. As you might imagine, the military is in a constant state of recruiting. And during times like these, when the civilian job market is very tight, unemployment is very low, the military finds it much harder to recruit good people. And these days, not just because of the economy, but more so than ever. I was just reading a statistic of the prime age for recruiting for the military of 17 to 23 or 24. Only 23% of Americans are eligible to join the military, because there are many, unfortunately, who don't meet the physical fitness standards, or who have some kind of criminal or drug use background. All of these make them ineligible to join the military. As well, these days, it's very, very unusual for someone without at least a high school diploma to be able to be recruited into the military. So, whereas, half a century or more ago, judges would sentence criminals to you can either join the military or go to jail, right? And that was how people sometimes join the military. That really doesn't happen these days anymore. So, the military, interestingly enough, as a whole, is more highly educated than the civilian population as a whole. I'm repeating that phrase, which is not what people expect. For most of its history, people in the military were less educated, at least less formally educated, than the civilian population. That is no longer the case, nor has it been for, at least since when I joined the Navy back in the mid 2000s. I don't know when that shift took place, candidly, but it is the case today. So, I think I think roughly 95 or 96% of Americans have graduated from high school, whereas 99.9% or something like that of people in the military have graduated from high school. And while the numbers are not nearly as high for college graduates, nonetheless, the percentage of college graduates in the military is also higher than the civilian population as a whole. So I think the military has a lot to offer in terms of advice and or information that can be useful to people running businesses or people who are in leadership or even rank and file positions within the civilian business world. So I'm going to be looking to several sources for business lessons from the military. One of them is from what might be called sort of great books. So probably the best known book of military lessons that get applied to business is called The Art of War by Sun Tzu. So this is a book that was written, I don't remember exactly when, a couple thousand years ago, I believe. I don't remember the exact date of publication, or I mean of when it was written. But in any event, this is on most military reading lists, especially for people in positions of leadership. And there are numerous lessons that can be taken from The Art of War that can be applied to the business world. Now, I should say that I don't view business as war. Okay, war is a unique. I think it's fair to say, reasonable to say, a unique endeavor in human life. Obviously, the stakes are very high for combatants. It's potentially existential. People get killed, people get wounded, as we're seeing in Ukraine right now, and have seen in any war. So I don't look at business in that context. Nonetheless, although the stakes in business may not be as high in war, many of the ideas that apply to war fighting and the running of a military organization do apply. And so I won't be starting with The Art of War, but this is one sort of category, if you will, of sort of military sources from which we can gain business lessons. Another and I didn't bring an example of it, but another is the historical military figures. So I happen to be a lay scholar, if you will, of the life of General George Patton. And I think that Patton's life and his rise through the military has a lot of lessons for us as we contemplate what can we learn from the military that we can apply to the business world. And I'm going to share one of the lessons from Patton's life that I find very illuminating about him. And it also belies this sort of cult stereotype that's been developed about him, I think a lot of which comes from the 1970 movie Patton, where George C. Scott plays the famous general. And the movie has a number of inaccuracies, although I think in general, well, first of all, it's a wonderful movie to watch, and you do get a flavor of who Patton was, although George C. Scott's voice is a much lower range than Patton had a tenor voice from the reading that I've done. But when Patton was in his first military job after graduating from the military academy, newly minted second lieutenant, he was somewhere in kind of the Western United States. I want to say Kansas, but I could be wrong about the location. It doesn't matter for the story. He was, among his other duties, assigned to making sure that the stables where horses were kept that the stables were kept up and the horses were maintained properly. Now, when Patton was a second lieutenant, there was still horse cavalry in the United States military. So, we're talking in the 19 teens, I think, or maybe very early 20s. Let me think about this for a second. No, it would be 19 teens, early 19 teens, as a matter of fact. So one particular morning, Patton went to inspect the stables, and he was not at all pleased at their state of cleanliness and how the horses were taken care of. And he told the men that were assigned to that duty in no uncertain terms, he expected it to be cleaned up, top to bottom, spick and span, the whole thing. And they better, get to it, kind of thing. And then he went off to take care of whatever other duties he had. And he returned later that day in the afternoon and was very displeased at the lack of progress in getting the stables cleaned up. And he called the men together and just read them the riot act, really laying it on thick. And this is not a lesson I would necessarily have you take from Patton, but one of Patton's philosophies was, if you lay it on thickly with a lot of profanity, that really gets people moving. And that's what he was doing that day, blah, 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 blah. I don't know if he was using the F word or whatever he was using. And he said, now get to it, that kind of thing. And one of the men, rather than literally sort of jumping to it with alacrity, he just kind of, slowly walked off toward whatever he was going to do. And Patton was so angry, he said, "I told you to move, damn you." And the guy moved, right? And afterwards, Patton went to his office, and he felt very bad, and he couldn't figure out why. He felt he was perfectly justified in chewing the men out. They had been given an order to clean up the stables and hadn't done it. And they'd been given ample time to do it. And he realized that what he had said to that man when he said, damn you, was completely out of line. And so he immediately went back to the stables and he called the men back together. And he said, earlier when I was talking to you, I was very angry, and I do think I was justified because I had told you to get the stables cleaned up and you hadn't. But I said, damn this man here, and I should not have done that. That was wrong. And I apologize to you, and I will endeavor never to do it again. Now, for any of you who've seen the eponymous film on Patton or have read about him and about how arrogant he was, that may seem completely out of character. I disagree. I think that was completely in character. Patton was on a lifelong search to become the best possible officer that he could be, Army officer that he could be. And one of the things he realized was if he made a mistake or he treated a soldier improperly, that was counter to who he was and what he wanted to become. And so it was incumbent on him to apologize for having done so. And so he did. That level of humility in a leader is crucial, absolutely crucial. And the reality was, and although there's no indication he did it for this reason, because he did that, and he was willing, without being told to do so, to apologize to that soldier, the men just loved him, and they could never do enough for him. That, in my mind, is true leadership. And by the way, I would imagine, especially during that time, over 100 years ago, officers would say, damn you to soldiers all the time. I think the soldiers were probably pretty used to that. From their perspective, I could imagine they didn't really think it was that big a deal. But Patton did think it was a big deal, and a big deal mean that it was wrong. It was flat out wrong for him to do that. And as far as we know, while he would chew out soldiers when they were not performing right, including generals that were under his command in World War II. He never did that again. He was, in fact, a deeply religious man, a man who believed deeply in God. And he had a sense of who he was that he did his best to aspire to. And I think that's an important lesson for all of us in business, in life in general, of course, but in business in particular. A lot of times in business, we can get into a situation where we're tempted to do something that really isn't who we are. And sometimes we may even do that thing. On reflection, we need to correct whatever it is we've done. And contrary to how it feels inside, which is we're lowering how people see us, we're lowering their opinion of us by apologizing. Typically not. Typically by apologizing, we actually strengthen the relationship and the loyalty to people that report to us. I learned that lesson myself when I was a newly minted Lieutenant JG chaplain in my first duty station when I was with the Marine Corps in Okinawa. And I was really pushing one of my staff very hard to take a leadership program that the Marine Corps offered. He would have been the first sailor in his rating to be able to go through a Marine Corps leadership training program. And I thought, gosh, who wouldn't want to do this? Because I would want to do it if I could have, right? And of course that's how I was seeing it. And the sailor, he was kind of lukewarm about it. He didn't want to say, no, I'm not going to do it. But I could tell he wasn't enthusiastic. And I just thought, well, he doesn't really understand. He doesn't really get it. And I'm like, you're going to do great and all this stuff. Finally, he came to me and he said, I'm so nervous about this. I can't even sleep. And I said, oh, don't worry. Once you get into it, it's going to be fine. And then I started thinking about it, and I talked to my superior, if you will, the he was the base chaplain, the man that I worked for, basically. And I told him what was going on. And to his credit, he did not tell me what to do, but he said, you have to make the decision. This is what leadership is really about. And I thought about it, and for a long, long time, and the next day, I was still thinking about it, and I said, you know what? I'm not doing this for the right reason. I'm doing this because I think it's cool. But if the sailor is this concerned about not succeeding, then I'm setting him up for failure, is really what I concluded. And so I went and kind of hunted him down. I couldn't find him in the office. It turned out he was over in the smoke pit. And I talked, and I said, you know what? I've made a mistake. I've been pushing you to do something because I think it's a great thing. And I have not been listening to you and your concerns. And so if this is something you do not want to do, then I support your not doing it. And I mean, you could virtually see the anxiety released from him when I said that. And I thought, gosh, this sailor he's never going to trust me again. And he's going to think I'm wishy-washy and all the terrible things we think about when we have to, humble ourselves, really. And quite to the contrary, he was so enormously loyal, because I was willing to admit to him that I had done something wrong. I apologized to him. The loyalty skyrocketed as a result. And that also, among the other sailors with whom I hadn't had that kind of interaction, they saw that I was willing really to listen to one of their peers and take action based on what he said. And it made those relationships stronger as well. It was very much an object lesson for me. And again, I think that in this respect, it's not unusual in the business world for us to have someone junior to us, and we really think, hey, there's this great opportunity, and we really push them, and maybe they're not ready for it, or maybe they've got things going on in their lives that we don't know about, where the idea of what we're pushing them to do just doesn't fit with their plan at that time. And we have to be willing to take a step back, do our best to see their situation through their eyes, not our eyes, and perhaps come to the conclusion, I was wrong. And I'm sorry for putting you under that kind of pressure and for trying to impose my will on you. I shouldn't have done that. And I'm going to do my best not to repeat this mistake. Right? And by the way, those are the three parts of an apology. Number one, to explain what it is we did wrong. Second, to acknowledge that it was wrong and apologize. And third, to affirm to the person we will do our best not to repeat that mistake. That's a sincere apology. Okay? It is not a sincere apology to say, I'm sorry you felt overwhelmed by what I was doing. That's not an apology at all. That's putting the blame on that person. That's not an apology. That's saying I was right and you're deficient. Right? So, and these are, in this case, this was a lesson that I learned from reading about the life of George Patton. Okay. Now you may find it a little bit weird because George Patton was known to be an anti-Semite, and why would a Jewish guy, admire somebody who was anti-Semitic? Look, candidly, a lot of people of George Patton's class were anti-Semitic at that time. I will say that when he got to when his army overtook one of the death camps and he saw what had gone on there, he got physically sick by how Jews in those camps were treated. And he took immediate steps to alleviate their misery. So whatever he may have thought about Jews, and he didn't act in an anti-Semitic way. He acted to take care of his fellow human beings. So listen, I'm not condoning thinking anti-Semitic thoughts. On the other hand, I'm not going to discard somebody for being a product of his time, especially when his actions were completely, laudatory, frankly, when push really came to shove. So that's the lesson I have for you today. I actually didn't plan on doing that, but I thought it's a nice thing to share with you. The third source, real quickly, as we wrap up the show here, and this is where we're going to be going for the next few weeks, is looking at different military doctrines. So this is a book called War Fighting. This is part of Marine Corps doctrine. Okay, and you can see Expeditionary Warfare School. This was a distance education program I took. This is, going back a few years. And some of the concepts that you'll find in Marine Corps warfighting doctrine are things like friction and uncertainty, fluidity, disorder, complexity. So in the Marine Corps, of course, we're applying those concepts to the battlefield. In the business world, we're applying them to the business environment. And I think many of these concepts, including the ones that I mentioned, will help us better understand the environment in which we're operating and give us ideas on how to approach it and navigate it more successfully. And so over the next, many weeks and months, we're going to explore various of these concepts and see how can we apply them to improve our business and professional success. So that's really what this show is about. Again, it's the way to wow, business lessons from the military. Now, my experience is in the Navy and the Marine Corps. I have had some exposure to the Air Force and the Army. I don't know if I'm going to climb into their doctrines or not, but maybe I'll have a guest on who can talk to Army and or Air Force doctrine. That might be interesting for us to do. And as just as with people making money, I'm absolutely open to hearing your ideas, your thoughts about what you'd like to see. So if there's some aspect of military doctrine, military leadership that you've been curious about, by all means, let me know. Or if you are a student of a particular military individual and you think that they have lessons from their life and career that can be applied to the business and professional world, and you'd like to talk about that, by all means, let me know. Just like in my other show, look in the show notes, you'll have my email address. You'll also be able to connect on social media. You can always post on social media a thought or an idea or a question. Happy to answer them. And together, we will learn as many business and professional lessons as we can from how the military runs its operations, how it plans its strategies, how it executes its tactics. So thank you so much for joining me today. Again, we're here every Tuesday, 10:30 a.m. Pacific time, 1:30 p.m. Eastern time, an hour in Central and Mountain time, and all the various other time zones throughout the world. And I look forward to being with you now twice a week. Tomorrow is the Way to Wow show, People Making Money, and that's at 12:30 Pacific time and 3:30 Eastern time. Again, an hour in, 1:30 and 2:30 in the various interior time zones. Please join me every Wednesday to talk about various ideas to advance your professional success in terms of I'm all of a sudden I'm at a loss for words. Oh my gosh. So we've talked about things like the 3 things you should do every day to power your success. We've talked about how to deal with business, with meetings to discuss a job, how to start a business, entities for starting a business, ways businesses get funded, all kinds of those more sort of logistical concepts to professional and business success. And also I've had many guests talk about their career success, and will continue to do so. So do join me tomorrow at 12:30 for our hour together, People Making Money. And next week, Tuesday at 10:30 a.m. Pacific time for business lessons from the military. And as always, in tribute, Marie, darling, you are still my belle and my inspiration. You all have a wonderful rest of the day.